World War II breaks out. Germany is invading Europe country by country and is becoming an unstoppable force of fascism. And one of the secrets to their success across the battlefield of Europe lies across the ocean on the massive rock covered in ice known as Greenland. But who would ever suspect that the Germans would have been chased out of their rural Arctic camps on the coast by a pack of dogs? Welcome everyone to Sunflower Storytime with me, Kathleen, where we tell tales that celebrate the resiliency of the human spirit and leave us feeling hopeful and inspired. So gather around, scooch on in, and I'll tell you the tale of the Greenland Sledge Patrol in World War II and beyond. We're telling today's story to celebrate how a small population banded together to help fend off a fascist empire. With just a few hardy, skilled volunteers, they were able to put a large dent in the Germans' plans. So, Greenland. In April of 1940, Germany invades Denmark and is occupying the government and is in charge of all of their foreign affairs. Greenland is, of course, a territory of Denmark, but with the occupation in Copenhagen, the fate of Greenland was in question. The Greenland Constitution of 1925 directed that the country be administered with the best interests of the Greenlanders. And with the Danish trade monopoly now severed, they were completely cut off from the rest of the world. The United States took a special interest. They were still neutral at this time. They didn't join the war officially until a year later. But under the umbrella of the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, the entire Western Hemisphere was considered of American interest. And at the Havana Conference in July of 1940, the U.S. and Central and South American nations convened and agreed to collectively govern territories of nations taken over by the Axis powers in the Western Hemisphere. So the U.S. would view an invasion of Greenland to be a violation of the Monroe Doctrine and therefore requires U.S. intervention to prevent it. In 1940, the U.S. consulate opened in Greenland and they sent Coast Guard ships. They thought that the ships from other branches of military might be seen as a little more aggressive and an offensive move. So they sent the Coast Guard. They would go on to ratify the Greenland Treaty. Minister Kaufman was adamant that the U.S. should not accept the government in Copenhagen as a legitimate ruler of Greenland while Denmark was under occupation. Now, why did the Germans have interest in Greenland in the first place? And the answer is weather. What happened in Greenland was thought to happen in Europe the following day. So accurate weather predictions of what Europe was going to go through was of vital importance to the battlefields. They plotted to sneak onto the northeastern coast of Greenland to set up small weather stations to give meteorology reports back to Germany. So thus the need for recon and surveillance of the rugged Arctic coast was needed. And believe it or not, the best method of transportation and movement around these parts was sleds pulled by dogs. Ships had issues navigating the ice, planes had horrid visibility in weather conditions, and there were long hours of darkness in this region. Before the Danes colonized Greenland, the native people were the Inuits. The Greenlandic Inuits are still a large majority of the population in Greenland. They're broken down into a few different regions and speak, I'm going to offend an entire nation of people. They speak Kalaalleq. I'm really sorry. The Inuits have been using sled dogs for hunting and transporting for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Until the invention of the snow machine in the 20th century, it was the only method for traveling across the ice. U.S. Coast Guard Commander Edward Iceberg Smith and Greenland's Governor Esk Brun came together to form the Sledge Patrol. They evacuated the region. Anyone left behind would be automatically considered a threat. There were only 27 inhabitants of this region and 12 hunters and 4 current weather stations. Everyone from that region was sent to Scoresby Sound. They asked for volunteers, and there were originally 15 men who signed up, 10 Danes, 1 Norwegian, and 4 native Greenlanders. By the end, there would be 27 total. First, they considered it a police unit, but as the reality of war and potential for direct contact became apparent, they were given military ranks. The first and only Greenland Army, and was co-designated as a reserve unit for the U.S. Army. Ib Poulsen, of Danish descent, was the overall commander of the Sledge Patrol. Each patrolman carried one lone hunting rifle. These men were mostly Arctic hunters. They were used to the harsh environment, but the biggest threat they faced besides the elements was polar bears, who have no chill and show no mercy. But they were not trained soldiers, but they signed up to go into harm's way to defend their homeland. There was a total of over 700 miles of coast to protect and recon. On a good day, a single patrol could travel up to 50 miles, but in poor weather conditions, they maybe only got 15 to 20 miles. They established a few camps or sites, and groups of 2 to 3 men would be stationed at each, and then sometimes one or more were sent on long patrols and would be out for weeks or months at a time. The main 2 stations up north were called BE4 and BE5. BE stands for Bluey East. Bluey was the code designation for Greenland. So the main camps we're going to talk about today are Bluey 3, which is Scoresby Sound. Up north is BE4, and then BE5 is the highest north. The real asset to these teams were the dogs. They could smell and hear polar bears from up to 2 to 3 miles away. So when they camped for the night, they wouldn't be ambushed by a polar bear. The dogs would sound the alarm with so much time to spare. And this also means that they could detect humans from miles away. When the pack picked up on a scent, they would just follow it, which helped them survey much bigger distances than just what the humans could see with their eyes and ears. Almost immediately after the patrol was started, a suspicious-looking party was found near the entrance to Franz Josef Fjord. It was investigated, and the vessel was immediately seized, and the party was apprehended. This was the first American naval capture of World War II. So in the summer of 1942, a German trawler, the Sachsen, sailed from Kiel on a secret mission to Greenland under direct orders from naval headquarters in Berlin. The ship had 19 men aboard and was commanded by Lieutenant Hermann Ritter. So in March of 43, almost a year later, the commander of the Sledge Patrol, Poulsen, requested that Jensen goes to look at Sabine Island. He goes out and he brings 2 other Sledge Patrolmen with him. As they approached Sabine Island, the dogs were on high alert. Their ears were perked, their tails were wagging, and they started to sound the alarm that there's people nearby. When they go to investigate, one of the patrolmen notices footprints in the snow and yells out, "Footprints, human footprints, boots with heels." None of them had heels on their boots. They knew that these must have been Germans. They also found sleeping bags, daggers, Nazi uniforms, supplies, coal, and half a butchered polar bear. The 3 Sledge patrolmen immediately set off for BE5 to inform Poulsen and the others. So the Germans figured out that someone had approached them and found out where they were. They assumed that they were probably based out of BE5, which was the only place in transmission range within like hundreds of miles from there. So they sent out 2 search parties armed with submachine guns, rifles, revolvers, and they were told to go get the Sledge drivers and bring them back, but you can also bring them back dead if necessary. But they were really after them alive because they wanted to use them, the knowledgeable people about the area. So as the 3 Sledge Patrol are on their way back to BE5, they made a mistake and their dogs were tired, so they stayed and they set up camp for a night, and they were found. The dogs begin to howl and wake them up that someone's approaching, and they did not have time, or maybe they just panicked, and they took off on foot, all 3 men, and ran to escape, and all of the supplies and the dogs were left behind. So now the Germans have 3 sets of dogs. They have journals detailing who the patrol is, their routes, everything. The 3 men split up in the hopes that at least some of them would make it back to camp. And miraculously, all 3 of them did. But it took them more than 2 days, and they walked on foot over 100 miles in rural Greenland. That's crazy. So in response to this, Paulson hears what happened. He sends out to Governor Brune to see what they're going to do next and to potentially seek backup, like air support of some kind, or maybe something beyond just the one rifle that they all carried. They had no real weapons to take on a whole troop of Germans. When they finally reach word back, Brune says that their main task is also to eliminate enemy forces by capture or shooting. You are authorized to use any means to this end, and your weapons should be used rather than run least risk of being captured yourselves or at least sign among prisoners of resistance or attempts to escape. Remember, enemy probably resolute, so take no chances but shoot first. He pretty much just asked these essentially civilians to murder, which was a big deal. It's at this time that they really became viewed as a military unit, and they made armbands to designate themselves. That's as close to a military uniform as they ever got, was just a band on the arm. But the key is that now they could be considered military prisoners of war if they were ever captured. So now the Germans have multiple sledges, multiple sets of sled dogs, but they don't have quite the same expertise as the Greenlanders on how to use it. So Ritter had his men practice with these dogs and try to get better at driving. Paulson did reach out for aid, but apparently it was pretty tricky because the closest air base was in Iceland, which was very far and out of range, would need like multiple rounds of refuel to get there. And it would require pilots that had expertise in both Arctic navigation and bombing expertise. So it didn't come as quickly as he had hoped. So now Paulson is trying to reinforce BE5, their northernmost camp. But just in case they do need to evacuate, they set up a lot of depots between 5 and 4 with extra supplies in case they needed to quickly evacuate or had to leave with less supplies than they would intend to. So now we're going to follow kind of 2 packs of 3 men. Paulson sends 2 guys up north to find this one guy, Nielsen, who's been out doing recon and doesn't know what's going on. Jensen and Knudsen are going out north to find Nielsen and hopefully bring them all back to BE5 to help reinforce it. That leaves Paulson, the commander, and 2 others at BE5 currently. On the evening of March 23rd, Henry Rudy, one of the guys at BE5, yells, "Paulson, I think there's someone on the ice." Everybody grabs their rifles, and Paulson goes outside, and they start yelling at each other. And after a few exchanges, the German said, "Do you intend to offer armed resistance?" His answer in the affirmative was met instantly with tracer fire from an automatic weapon. In a hail of gunfire, all 3 men ran and escaped. And it took 10 minutes for BE5 to completely fall into the hands of the enemy. So now, those 3 that were at 5 are now on foot, fleeing back to BE4. And the 2 men that went north to find the other guy have no idea that BE5 has fallen. Paulson, by some miracle, left with just the shirt on his back, pants, and boots. He didn't have a coat. He didn't have anything. But he was able to find his way to one of the depots where supplies were hidden. Of course, there were no clothes there, but he was able to MacGyver himself a coat out of tent. Like a camping tent he managed to insulate himself with. And it took him 11 days, and he traveled over 230 miles on foot before making it back to BE4. Unbelievable. And by another stroke of fate, the other two also made it back to BE4 as well. So then Paulson sends out a message for everyone else to hear, but he sent it out in the native Inuit language in the hopes that the Germans wouldn't be able to interpret it. When the other two were on their way to BE4, they happened to run into Nielsen, the guy that the other two had gone out in search of. And he had quite a story to tell. So Nielsen was found by Jensen and Knudsen. The three of them were supposed to take a roundabout way back to base, but they decided to go the very direct route to get back as fast as possible. But as they approached what was BE5, it turns out a trap was waiting for them. After the Germans took BE5, they first ransacked the place to see if they could find any information about what people were out where. And they saw that these three men were probably on their way back. So they were waiting for them. And Knudsen was the first to approach. He was at least hours ahead of the other two. The Germans yelled out. They were only intending to shoot the dogs so that they could capture Knudsen, but something about a machine gun jammed and they accidentally killed him. By the time the other two came, they saw that smoke was coming out of the chimney. They figured that it was their friend at the camp waiting for them, but the same trap laid waiting for them, only this time they were just captured very, very quickly. So now Jensen and Nielsen have been captured by the Germans. With their capture and with their earlier captures, the Germans now had 8 dog sled teams. But Ritter knew that they needed the expertise of Jensen and Nielsen if they were going to get back to their weather station base successfully. Our 2 Greenlanders were starting to stir up a plot about how they were going to escape. They find out that the main objective that the Germans had at this point was just to survive until their ship was able to get out of the ice that it was currently trapped in. They were just trying to make it out. So somehow, Jensen makes a plea to Ritter, asking that Nielsen can go back to where Knudsen's body was so that he can bury him appropriately and wouldn't leave his body open to attacks from Arctic foxes and polar bears. You know, to fortify his grave. In exchange, Jensen would lead Ritter on a recon mission into the north and east. After Nielsen did the burial, he was supposed to wait until they came back and picked him up. But Ritter was kind of unsure whether he would actually follow through with it since he was sending him off on his own. But he didn't really care that much. He at least had one guy with him, Jensen, that he could use. As expected, Nielsen leaves and he goes back to BE4 and meets up with Paulson and everybody else and tells them the whole tale. He tells them that Knudsen was murdered and that Jensen is in the hands of the Germans. But one of the most important pieces to this was that Nielsen was able to tell them exactly where the German weather station was, which gives the American bombers a target that they know for sure. Paulson writes out to his commanders and waits for word back on what they're supposed to do next. They're pretty much told that everybody is to leave BE4 and everyone is to hightail back to BE3, Scoresby Sound. So poor Jensen, up in the German hands, is out on some sort of mission with Ritter. Just 2 of them are alone and they go off into the wilderness and Jensen's able to overpower him. He takes his gun and he flees, leaving him alone. He goes back to BE4 and finds that the whole place is abandoned and is like, where'd everybody go? Thankfully, Paulson left a note for him saying what the plan was and that everyone was going back to BE3. So you'd think that he would then proceed to go to BE3 where everyone else was. But he doesn't. He actually goes back to Ritter, who he abandoned in the wilderness, because there's some sort of Arctic moral code that you don't leave them there to die on their own. So he went back to save him. But this also means that he's put himself back in their hands and he's officially a prisoner of war. By the end of May, the 25th to be precise, almost 3 months after their first encounter with this group of Germans, they finally send U.S. Army Air Force B-24 Liberator bombers and attack the base that they have. Now, no one died during this bombing, but all of their meteorology equipment was destroyed. So the weather station is gone. About a month after it's destroyed, pretty much everyone at the base was evacuated by the Germans by seaplane. A new BE-5 was made, and the headquarters was reestablished, and the Sledge Patrol continued on. Their last conflict with the enemy was about a year later, in April of 1944. A 6-man Sledge Patrol assault team led by Jensen attacked the Basgeiger station. Transmissions from this new station were picked up by an American listener who reported it to the Sledge Patrol, who immediately led the assault. They got into a firefight, but it didn't go super well, and the Sledge Patrol actually had to retreat, but the entire skirmish got the Germans so flustered and nervous that they just evacuated themselves and fled. So, they still succeeded. And when the war ended, the United States awarded the Legion of Merit Medal to Sledge Patrolman Captain Ib Paulson, Captain Jensen, and Corporal Knudsen, posthumously, for their valor and action against the enemy. The Sledge Patrol kind of went dormant for a little while after it. It never completely went away, but it was officially reorganized and reestablished in 1950, and they later changed the name to the Resolute Dog Sled Patrol, and eventually to what it's currently called, the Sirius Dog Sled Patrol. Sirius is what they call Dog Star, which is the brightest star in the night sky. So this is still a present-day operation run by the Royal Danish Navy and continues to ensure Danish sovereignty in northeast Greenland. So same as it was done in the 40s, patrolling is usually done in pairs using dog sledges, sometimes for up to 4 months and often without additional human contact. They're headquartered out of the weather station in Dangborg at Sandesen. This is the same site where Knudsen is buried. Its mission is essentially identical to its World War II predecessor, including providing critical meteorological data. There's only about 14 Sirius patrol members at a time ever. It's a very small elite group of people. It takes a huge amount of training to be qualified to do it. Once selected, they take a course that's a minimum of 8 months long, covers a large range of topics including weapons training, Arctic hunting, veterinary skills, meteorology, and winter endurance. They work in teams of 2. There's 6 teams operating in a given year. There's 6 new recruits, all paired with veterans, and then 2 radio operators at the main headquarters. Patrols can last up to 26 months without a break or return to base, and personnel are not eligible to take any leave during their time on duty. Patrols run year-round, including during severe Arctic weather months. The Sirius Dog Sled Patrol is undoubtedly one of the most elite military special forces units in the world. So, all in all, that's the highlight reel of the Greenland Sledge Dog Patrol of World War II. I don't know about you, but I always love a story where the dog is the hero. I had so much fun researching this story. If you have any other information, please let me know. If you have any corrections, let's talk about it. So, thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you again soon.